Hi, Pre-Algebra. Today we are looking at Topic 3, Lesson 3, percents greater than 100. So as you're thinking about percents, remember that 100% of a whole is the whole thing. So 100% means that I have one whole. So if I have 100% of the pizza, I have the whole thing. So let's look at an example of how this works. So if I have 100% of the year one population of ants, so here I have a group of 8 ants. That is 100%. That's the whole. So I have 100% here, or one whole. I have that once, twice, 3 wholes, and 4 wholes. So if 100% is one whole, then 4 wholes would be 400%. Plus, I also have part of another whole. So here in this last group, I have 6 out of the 8 total. So I need to think about 6/8 and how to make that a percent. So I know that this would reduce to 3/4, which I know to be 0.75, which I know to be 75%. So altogether then, this whole group would be 400% because I have 4 entire populations plus 75% of another population. So always think of 100% as comparison to one whole. Let's look at matching up some of these and deciding what these amounts represent. So our categories could be less than 10, greater than 10, less than 100, greater than 100. So as I'm looking first at 200% of 1, and I'm thinking about how much that is, I'm first going to think about how much is 100% of 1. If I have 100% of 1, I have the whole thing. So if I have 200% of 1, I have twice that amount. So this would be 200% of 1 would equal 2. So we'll say this is less than 10. On the second one, 125% of 100. Well, if we think about 100% of 100, that would be the whole thing. So I have all of 100, but plus I have 25% more than that. So 25% of 100 is easy because a percent is a comparison to 100. So 25% of 100 is 25%. So that would give me an amount of 125. So this one would be greater than 100. In my third example, I'm looking for 200% of 75. So let's first think about 100% of 75. If I have 100% of it, I have all of it. So if I have 200%, I have twice 100%, right? So 2 times 75 would be 150. So this one would also be greater than 100. On my fourth example, I'm looking for 400% of 26. So let's first think of 100% of 26. And then I can take that times 4. If I have 100% of 26, I have all of it. And I know roughly that 4 times 25 is 100. So 4 times 26 would be 104. So this will also be greater than 100. As I look in this column, 125% of 25. Well, I know that 100% of 25 is 25. And then I'm going to take 25% more and add it to this. So 25% of 25, or a quarter of 25. So this one is definitely going to be greater than 10. If I'm looking for 300% of 2, then I might first think about 100% of 2, which would be all of 2. And 300% would be 3 times as much. So 3 times 2 would be 6, so this one will be less than 10. If I'm looking at 1000% of 15, let's break this down by thinking about 100% of 15, which is all of it, so 15. And 1000% is 10 times greater than 100%, so I'm going to need to multiply 100%, which is 15, times 10. So this would be 150. This will definitely be greater than 100. And finally, if I'm looking at 700% of 5, then I can first think about 100% of 5. 100% would be all of it, and 700% would be 7 times as much as 100%. So this would certainly be greater than 10, but less than 100. Okay, so let's let you take a try at doing this on your own. So you may pause the video as you consider this question. What is the best estimate for 350% of 20? So I might first think of, well, 100% of 20 is 20, and 300% is going to be, or I'm sorry, 350% is going to be 3.5 times as big as 100%. So I might go ahead and just multiply in my head 3.5 times 20. Well, I know that that would be similar to 35 times 20, which if I double 3.5, that gives me 7. So I can use that mental math strategy to help me figure out that this would be 70. So just kind of estimating in my head, if it's 3.5 times as big as 100%, then it's definitely going to be greater than 50, but less than 100. Okay, let's try this one again. You can pause the video and come up with your solution and then double check. Student A says that 200% of 1 is 2. Student B says that 200% of 1 is 200. Which student is correct? Well, let's start with what student A says. If I want to find 200% of 1, I'm going to start by finding 100% of 1. 100% of 1 is 1. So if I want to find 200%, I can double this. So 200% of 1 would be 2. Probably student B is thinking that 200% of 1, that we would need to multiply 200 times 1, when actually what we're doing is if I want to take 200% of 1 and I want to make it an equation, we talked about last chapter that we can take a percent of a number, of means multiply, and I change my percent to a decimal. Well, 200% as a decimal would be 2 because I moved my decimal point 2 places to the left. So I truly would be multiplying 2 times 1 to get 2. All right, and finally, if we want to calculate percents greater than 100, we're going to do that the same way we calculate other percents. So if I'm asked what is 130% of 800, I can still use my percent equation. So when I see the word what, that tells me that I don't know, and so I need to use a variable. So I'm going to use x to represent what. Is means equals. I'm going to take my percent, 130, and write it as a decimal. To do that, I'll move the decimal point over 2 spots, so this becomes 1.3. Of means times, and 800 I can just keep as a numeral. So x is really 1.3 times 800. which when I multiply that out, I get x equals 1,040. So in this case, I was looking for the part. So we could also think part equals percent times whole. So part would be my x equals percent times the whole. 800 is the whole. So one last example here. A study found that the alligator population this year is 120% of last year's population. So I see the word of, so I'm thinking multiplication. If last year's population is 60, how many alligators are there this year? So first think about what an unreasonable answer would be. What would be too high or too low? So last year's population is 60. I'm looking for 120% of 60. So 120% is more than 100. 100% would be all of 60. So my answer better be greater than 60. So let's look at solving this two different ways. I could say, using my equation, I could say part equals percent times the whole. And I could substitute in. So my percent is 120% times the whole, which is 60, and that's going to give me my part, which I'm trying to find. And as I do that, I'm going to change my percent to a decimal by moving my decimal point 2 spots. So this becomes 1.2 times 60. And when I do 1.2 times 60, I get 72. That seems like a reasonable answer because that would be all of 60% plus another 20%. Or, since I know that 120% would be 100% plus 20%, I could say, okay, 100% of 60 is 60, and now I just need to find 20% of 60 and add it to that, so that 100% plus 20% will give me 120% altogether. So if I multiply 0.2 times 60, I find that that amount is 12, which also gets me to an answer of 72. All right, let's go ahead and try this out on your homework, the digits 3.3. Good luck, everybody. And for a special bonus, if you would like to see a worked out example where we are given the parts and we're finding the percent, then I will work out number 2 here for you. So when you are asked to do something like 96 is what percent of 12, we could do our percent equation. So I could say 96 is means equals. What tells me it's unknown, so I need a variable. What percent of means times 12. So I could do it this way, but I could also set up a proportion. So we're saying 96, that's my part, of my whole, which is 12, and I'm trying to find x percent. So for the missing percent, you may find the proportion method a little easier. So if I want to do my fishtail method, I will start at 100 and I will multiply, divided by, equals. So 100 times 96 divided by 12, and we get an answer of 800. Now let's ask ourselves, is that reasonable? Does 96 seem like it would be 800% of 12? Well, I know that 100% of 12 would be 12. I apologize, quick interruption. So if I am wanting to double check my answer to see if 96 is, if it's reasonable for 96 to be 800% of 12, then I could say, okay, 100% of 12 would be 12 times 8 does in fact give me 96.